November 14th, 1923. A Tuesday morning in central Berlin. A 43-year-old schoolteacher named Marlene is dragging a leather suitcase across the Friedrichstrasse. She isn't traveling. She's buying bread. Inside the suitcase, 200 billion marks. Stacked, banded, heavy enough to make her shoulder ache. She can smell the ink on the bills, still sharp, because most of them were printed last week. The bakery she's walking toward has already changed its price twice since she left her apartment 20 minutes ago. 11 months earlier, this same loaf cost 250 marks. That's an increase of 800 million% in less than a year. And in about 6 minutes, standing in line, watching the clerk cross out the old price and chalk a new one on the board, Marlene will do something she hasn't done in 20 years of teaching. She will start to cry. This is the story of why printing money can destroy a country. And the scary part is, it keeps happening. Here is a question that sounds so obvious, it feels almost stupid to ask. If a country needs more money, why doesn't it just print more? Seriously. People are poor, hospitals are underfunded, roads are falling apart. The government literally owns the machine that makes money. So why not just turn it on, print a few trillion, and hand it out? I used to think this was a dumb question. And honestly, that's embarrassing, because it's actually one of the most important questions in economics. The answer to it has toppled governments, starved millions, and turned entire nations into cautionary tales that economists whisper about the way doctors whisper about plagues. And here's the uncomfortable part. Every single government that destroyed its own currency thought they were being smart. They thought they'd found a shortcut. They thought, just this once the rules wouldn't apply. They were wrong. They are always wrong. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why, in a way that'll make you feel like you cracked a code nobody taught you in school. But I gotta warn you, once you see this, you can't unsee it. You'll start noticing it everywhere. In the news, in your grocery bill, in the way your government talks about spending. So buckle up. We're going to travel across 100 years, 3 continents, and 3 currencies that died screaming. And I promise you, the reason they died is not what you think. Before we get to the destruction, though, we need to talk about something even more basic. What is money? And I don't mean that in a philosophical, stare at the ceiling at 2 in the morning kind of way. I mean mechanically. What is this thing in your pocket actually doing? Okay, so imagine there's no money. None. You're a farmer. You grow apples. You need shoes. So you find a shoemaker and you say, hey, I'll give you 40 apples for a pair of boots. And maybe that works. But what if the shoemaker doesn't want apples? What if she wants fish? Now you gotta find a fisherman who wants apples, trade your apples for fish, then bring the fish to the shoemaker. This is called the double coincidence of wants, and it's a nightmare. It's like trying to arrange a group dinner where everyone has different dietary restrictions. It technically works, but everyone's miserable, and someone always ends up with a sad salad. So humans invented money. And money is not a thing. It's a technology. It's a shared agreement. When I hand you a $20 bill, I'm not giving you something valuable in itself. I'm giving you a token that says, someone, somewhere, will trade you something real for this. Money is a promise. It's a little piece of trust you can fold up and put in your wallet. And that's the key word. Trust. The entire system runs on trust. You trust that the 20 in your pocket today will buy roughly the same amount of stuff tomorrow. You trust that your government isn't just printing these things in a basement somewhere like counterfeit concert tickets. The moment that trust breaks, the whole system doesn't just slow down, it collapses. And I mean collapses the way a building collapses. Fast, loud, and with people trapped inside. Now here's where it gets dangerous. Governments figured out a long time ago that if they control the printing press, they control something very powerful. They don't have to raise taxes, which makes people angry. They don't have to cut spending, which makes people angry. They can just quietly, gently, almost invisibly create new money and spend it. And at first, nobody notices. Prices go up a little, but slowly. A loaf of bread costs a few pennies more. Gas ticks up. People grumble, but they adapt. It's like slowly turning up the temperature in a room. Nobody jumps up and screams. They just get a little uncomfortable, loosen their collar, and keep sitting there. But here's what's actually happening behind the curtain, and this is the part that made me genuinely angry when I first understood it. When a government prints new money, it doesn't create new wealth. There's no new factory, no new farm, no new invention. The total amount of stuff in the country is exactly the same. There are the same number of cars, the same number of houses, the same amount of food. All that changes is there are more pieces of paper chasing the same amount of stuff. So each piece of paper becomes worth a little less. Your paycheck, your savings account, your grandmother's retirement fund, all of it silently, invisibly, is being diluted. Think about it like this. Imagine you and 9 friends own a pizza. 10 slices, 1 for each person. Now someone comes along and says, actually, we're going to cut this pizza into 20 slices. Does everyone get more pizza? No. The pizza is the same size. Each slice just got smaller. That's what printing money does. It slices the pizza thinner. And the cruel part, the genuinely cruel part, is that the people who get the new money first, the government, the banks, the institutions close to the printing press, they get to spend it before prices adjust. They get full-size slices. By the time the money trickles down to you and me, prices have already gone up. We get the thin slices. Economists have a fancy name for this. They call it the Cantillon effect. But you don't need to remember the name. Just remember this. Printing money is a tax. It's a tax that nobody votes for, nobody debates, nobody even sees on their paycheck. And it falls hardest on the people who can least afford it, the ones who hold cash, who live on fixed incomes, who trusted the system to protect them. Now, I spent way too long on that pizza metaphor, I know, but I needed you to really feel it in your bones before we travel to the places where this mechanism didn't just nibble at people's savings. It devoured entire civilizations. Let's start in Berlin, 1923. Picture a woman named Marlene. She's 43. She teaches literature at a secondary school. She has read Goethe and Schiller to teenagers for 20 years. She's not rich. She's not poor. She's solidly middle class. She owns her apartment. She has savings in the bank. She drinks coffee with cream every morning from a cafe on Friedrichstrasse. In January of 1923, a loaf of bread costs about 250 marks. She can afford that just fine. Now, I need you to hold that number in your head, 250, because what happens next will break your brain. Germany had just lost the First World War. The country owed massive reparations to the Allies, about 132 billion gold marks. The economy was shattered, factories were idle, and in January 1923, France invaded the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, because Germany had fallen behind on payments. The German workers went on strike in protest, patriotic, defiant, brave. But now the government had a problem. Millions of workers weren't producing anything, but they still needed to be paid. Hospitals needed to run. Soldiers needed boots. The government looked at its empty treasury and made a decision that felt reasonable in the moment. They turned on the printing press. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I wouldn't have been tempted to do the same thing. If I were in charge and millions of families were going hungry, and the machine that makes money was sitting right there, I'd probably think about it too. That's what makes this so terrifying. It's not a stupid decision. It's a seductive one. By July, Marlene's bread costs 100,000 marks. She's confused, but she's coping. She spends her paycheck faster now. By September, it's 1.5 million marks. She's getting paid twice a day, because if she waits until the end of the day, her morning wages are worthless. She carries money in bags, Other people use wheelbarrows, and I know that sounds like an exaggeration, like something someone made up for a documentary. It's not. There are photographs, actual photographs of German citizens wheeling cash through the streets like it was construction debris. By November, a loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks. Let me say that again, because I need it to land. 200 billion marks for one loaf of bread. Marlene's life savings, the money she set aside for 20 years of teaching German literature, the money that was supposed to carry her through retirement, couldn't buy a single newspaper. Children were playing with stacks of bills in the street, building towers, folding them into paper airplanes. One woman left a suitcase full of banknotes outside a shop for just a minute. When she came back, someone had stolen the suitcase and dumped the money on the sidewalk. The suitcase was worth more than the cash inside it. And here's the thing that doesn't get talked about enough. It wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a moral crisis. When money dies, trust dies with it. People stop believing in institutions. They stop believing in fairness. They stop believing that playing by the rules would lead to a decent life. Savers were wiped out. Debtors were liberated. If you owed money, congratulations. You could pay off your mortgage with pocket change. If you'd saved money your whole life, if you'd done the responsible thing, you were destroyed. Think about what that does to a society. It punishes the careful and rewards the reckless. It's upside down. And the resentment that created, the fury and the humiliation, became the fertile soil for something much darker that would arrive 10 years later. I won't say more about that. You already know where that road leads. The German hyperinflation ended when they introduced a new currency called the Rentenmark and, crucially, stopped printing money to cover deficits. The fever broke, but the scar tissue never fully healed. To this day, more than 100 years later, Germany has one of the most inflation-averse central banks in the world. They remember. They always remember. Now you might be sitting there thinking, okay, but that was 1923. It was the aftermath of a world war. It was a unique situation. It couldn't happen again, right? Let me take you to Harare, 2008. Tendai is 31 years old. He's a nurse at Parirenyatwa Hospital, the biggest public hospital in Zimbabwe. He works 12-hour shifts, caring for patients with tuberculosis and HIV. He's good at his job. He's essential. And his monthly salary, converted at the official exchange rate, is worth roughly the price of a bus ticket. Zimbabwe's story is different from Germany's on the surface. There was no world war, no reparations. What there was a government that seized productive farmland from experienced farmers and handed it to political allies who didn't know how to farm. Agricultural output crashed. Export revenue dried up. The government found itself short of cash. And just like Germany 85 years earlier, it looked at the printing press and thought, just this once. In 2006, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe redenominated the currency, knocking off 3 zeros. 1,000 old dollars became 1 new dollar. They did it again in 2008, knocking off 10 zeros. Then again, knocking off 12 more. They were playing a game of musical chairs with decimal points, and the music was getting faster. By November 2008, inflation hit an estimated 79.6 billion%. Per month, not per year. Per month. Let me try to make that real for you because the number is so large, it loses all meaning. Imagine you buy a coffee on Monday morning for $3. By Friday, that same coffee costs over $4 billion. That's not a thought experiment. That was daily life in Harare. The Reserve Bank printed a $100 trillion banknote, 100 trillion. If you're watching this on your phone, go ahead and try to type that number. It's a 1, followed by 14 zeros. And this note, this $100 trillion bill, could not pay for a single bus ride across town. Tendai could not buy bread with it. He could not buy soap with it. It was And I hate using this phrase because it sounds dramatic, but it is literally true. It was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Do you know what happened? People stopped using Zimbabwe's money entirely. They started using American dollars, South African rand, anything that wasn't printed in Harare. The government had printed so much of its own currency that its own citizens refused to touch it. That's the endgame. That's what happens when trust reaches zero. The money doesn't slowly lose value. It ceases to exist. The government of Zimbabwe officially abandoned its own currency in April 2009. Think about that for a second. A sovereign nation looked at its own money and said, "This is garbage. We quit." And here's the truly heartbreaking detail that I can't stop thinking about. At independence in 1980, one Zimbabwean dollar was worth more than one US dollar. More. Within a generation, it took 100 trillion of them to not even buy a loaf of bread. That's not just an economic failure. That's a betrayal. Every person who saved in that currency, every nurse, every teacher, every grandmother who put money under her mattress, was robbed. Not by a thief, by their own government. Now, maybe you're still thinking, okay, but that's Zimbabwe. Small economy, dictator, mismanagement. It can't happen in a big, oil-rich country with actual resources. Let's go to Caracas. 2018. Luisa is 28. She works at a coffee shop in the Altamira neighborhood. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Let me say that again because it matters. The largest proven oil reserves on the planet. This should be one of the wealthiest countries in South America. And for a while, it was. Oil money funded free healthcare, free education, subsidized food, subsidized gasoline. The government was generous. The people were grateful. Everything was beautiful. Then oil prices dropped, and the government, which had built its entire budget around oil revenue, suddenly couldn't pay its bills. But the spending didn't stop. The subsidies continued. The social programs expanded. Where did the money come from? You already know the answer. They printed it. Luisa's daily reality looks like this. She gets paid in bolivars. By the time she walks from the coffee shop to the grocery store, her wages have lost value. She's learned to spend money within hours of receiving it. She's learned to check prices 3 times a day. And here's the detail that I'll never forget reading about. In some Venezuelan shops, vendors stopped counting bills. They weighed them. They put stacks of bolivars on a kitchen scale because counting them took longer than weighing them, and the price would change before they finished counting. Imagine that. Money so worthless that it's faster to weigh it than count it. Venezuela's inflation exceeded 1,000,000% in 2018. 1,000,000%. The government introduced a digital currency called the petro, supposedly backed by oil. Nobody trusted it. Why would they? The government that created it was the same government that had destroyed the bolivar. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild with a press conference and a new logo. By 2025, Venezuela still leads the world in inflation at roughly 270%, with projections pushing past 680% for 2026. The bolivar has depreciated over 80% against the dollar in a single year. The country is essentially dollarized. Most real transactions happen in US dollars because nobody, not even the Venezuelan government, fully trusts the Venezuelan currency. I need to pause here because I realize I've just dragged you through 3 horror stories and you might be feeling a little hopeless. Fair. I felt that way too when I first went down this rabbit hole. But this is where the click happens. This is where the pattern reveals itself. Look at these 3 stories side by side. Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. Different decades, different continents, different political systems. But the script is identical. It is always the same 5 steps, and I'm convinced no one teaches this clearly enough. Number 1, a crisis hits. War, economic shock, political upheaval. Something expensive that the government needs to pay for right now. Number 2, the government can't or won't raise taxes. Raising taxes is slow, unpopular, and politically dangerous. Cutting spending is even worse because it means taking things away from people who already have them. Number 3, they print money. It feels painless. It feels clever. It feels like a cheat code. Number 4, prices start rising. Slowly at first, then faster, then exponentially. The government blames merchants, speculators, foreign enemies, anyone except the printing press. Number 5, trust collapses. People flee the currency. They barter. They dollarize. They hoard real assets. The currency dies. And the people who suffer most are always, always, always the poorest. The ones who don't have assets to flee to. The ones who held cash because they trusted the system. Now here's the question that should be making you a little uncomfortable right now. What about your country? What about the country you're sitting in right now, watching this video? I'm not trying to scare you. I'm really not. And I need to be honest about the limits of what I know here. I'm not an economist. I'm a guy who reads a lot and tries to explain things clearly. But the data is the data. In 2020, during the pandemic, the world's major central banks created more money in a single year than at any point in modern history. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet nearly doubled. The European Central Bank wasn't far behind. And yes, the circumstances were extraordinary. A global pandemic, economies shutting down, people losing jobs. The money printing arguably prevented a depression. But here's the thing. That money didn't disappear. It went into the system. And what followed? Inflation. The highest inflation in 40 years across most developed economies. Grocery prices spiked, rent spiked, used car prices went insane. And ordinary people, people who did nothing wrong, who were just trying to get through a pandemic, watched their purchasing power erode in real time. Now, the major economies pulled back. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates aggressively. The European Central Bank shed over 3 trillion euros in assets. Even the Bank of Japan, which had been printing money like it was going out of style for decades, finally started tightening in 2024. The fever, for now, seems to be coming down. US inflation dropped to about 2.7% in 2025, but even that number, which sounds small, means your money buys about 3% less stuff every year. Over 10 years, that's almost a quarter of your purchasing power gone. Over 30 years, your dollar buys less than half of what it does today. Quietly. Invisibly. And here is what I think is the most important lesson in all of this, and it's the reason I wanted to make this video. The difference between a country that prints money and survives and a country that prints money and collapses is not the amount of money they print. It's trust. It's whether the rest of the world, and more importantly, that country's own citizens, still believe the currency is worth something. The United States can run enormous deficits and print staggering amounts of money because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. People trust it. Central banks hold it. Oil is priced in it. That trust is not infinite. It's not guaranteed. And it's not something any government should take for granted. But it exists. And it's the reason the US can do things that would annihilate a smaller economy. Zimbabwe didn't have that trust. Venezuela didn't have it. Weimar Germany lost it. And once it's gone, once people look at your currency and think, this might be worthless tomorrow, the game is over. Because trust in money is like trust in a relationship. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy. And you can't print trust on a printing press. I want to leave you with something that isn't doom and gloom, because I genuinely believe understanding this makes you more powerful, not more afraid. Number 1, money is a story we all agree to believe. That sounds fragile, and it is. But it's also how every human institution works, from law to marriage to borders on a map. The story is real as long as we treat it as real. Number 2, inflation is not a natural disaster. It's a policy choice. Every time prices rise because a government printed too much money, someone made that decision in a room somewhere. You have the right to ask why and to hold them accountable. Number 3, the best protection against monetary destruction is understanding it. You're watching this video. You now know more about how money actually works than most people will learn in their entire lives. I'm not saying that to flatter you. I'm saying it because it's true, and it's sad, and it should make you a little angry. If this made something click for you, watch the video I made on how the Federal Reserve actually works, because that's the other half of this story, and honestly, it's even weirder than this one. And I realize I might have made you slightly paranoid about the money in your pocket. That wasn't entirely my intention, but I'm not entirely sorry either. The stories in this video are built from composite characters for clarity. Marlene, Tendai, and Louisa aren't specific individuals, but their experiences are based on real, documented events in Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. The economic data comes from the International Monetary Fund, the Federal Reserve, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and peer-reviewed historical research. This is not financial advice. This is context. And context is the one thing that never loses value.